An arrogant policeman, a seemingly harmless insult, and a fateful collision. In just a few short seconds, he had pushed himself into a dead end. When he realized the truth about the woman he had just insulted, he was stunned. But it was too late. What happened? Let's find out. The district court is an ancient, imposing building with towering white stone pillars symbolizing justice and the strictness of the law. Every day it witnesses countless trials, from petty cases to shocking corruption cases. The large hallway is paved with marble, the pale yellow light reflecting on the shiny floor, creating a space that is both solemn and cold. People come and go busily, from lawyers, court staff to defendants with their heads bowed, waiting for their trial. Mark Rollins walked confidently through the crowd. He was a tall, well-dressed police officer, his uniform neat, his badge gleaming on his chest. His imposing gait and heavy steps made passers-by shy away. Mark had a sharp face. His eyes always exuded a cold, arrogant look. For him, being in court was not something to worry about, but simply part of the job, a place where he could flaunt his power and control over those less fortunate. Mark Rollins is not just an ordinary police officer. He has a history of abusing his power, often using excessive force against suspects. He knows how to hide his actions thanks to his close relationships within the force. Thanks to that, despite many complaints against him, no one can touch Mark. He believes that he is invulnerable, that no matter what he does, someone will stand up for him. That is why he becomes more and more arrogant, looking down on everyone he considers inferior to him. That morning, Mark was in court to testify in a case he was in charge of. He didn't care much about the outcome of the trial, because his testimony was always valued more than anyone else's. In his mind, justice was not about the truth, but about what those in power decided. As Mark was walking through the crowded hallway, a woman walking in the opposite direction accidentally bumped into him. The impact wasn't strong, but it was enough to make him feel uncomfortable. Mark stopped immediately, frowning, his eyes flashing with annoyance. The woman in front of him stood straight, not seeming to panic or hastily apologize like other people usually did when they accidentally bumped into him. Who is she? She was not wearing a court uniform, nor did she have the appearance of a defendant or a witness. She was wearing a dark black suit, the delicate cut of which accentuated her elegant figure. Under the hallway lights, her skin glowed softly. Her long hair was neatly tied up, revealing a resolute yet calm face. Her sharp eyes swept over Mark without fear or confusion. Mark frowned, feeling uncomfortable. He was used to people bowing to him, but she didn't have that attitude at all. He took a deep breath, his gruff voice breaking the silence between them. "Do you have eyes? You bumped into a policeman and don't even apologize?" A few people around stopped and glanced at them. The atmosphere in the hallway became more tense. The woman kept her face calm and gently replied, "I didn't mean to." Her voice was deep and powerful, but without fear or anxiety. Mark narrowed his eyes. That answer did not satisfy him. He was used to people apologizing and bowing to him, but this woman stood there as if she did not care about him. "Not on purpose? You think that's enough?" he growled, taking another step forward, his eyes cold. "Do you know I can arrest you right here? Causing a disturbance in public, obstructing public officials, what charges do you want to be charged with?" Such threats usually strike fear into people, but the woman before him showed no signs of worry. She simply smiled slightly, an unreadable smile, and looked straight into his eyes. Mark sensed something was wrong. She wasn't afraid of him, not at all. He frowned, feeling even more frustrated. Everyone knew how much power the police had in this court, yet she dared to challenge him. The people around began to whisper, curiously watching the developments. A few court staff glanced at each other, seemingly recognizing this woman. But Mark did not. He had never seen her before. "I advise you to apologize now, or else—" Before he could finish his sentence, another voice rang out from afar, interrupting him. "Mark, stop it!" He turned his head and saw Chief Richard Coleman standing at the end of the hallway, his face stern. His eyes swept over the woman, then moved to Mark, carrying a clear warning. Mark blinked, confused. Why was the sheriff here? And why did he look so nervous? The woman still kept her slight smile, her eyes flashing with a coldness that Mark didn't notice. This little encounter turned out to be not as simple as he thought. Sheriff Richard Coleman walked briskly through the courthouse hallway, a thick stack of files in his hands. A man in his 50s with graying hair and a stern face, he carried himself with the air of a veteran police officer. His dark blue uniform was buttoned neatly, and the police badge gleamed on his chest, projecting his authority. With over 30 years of service in the industry, Richard knew the system better than anyone. He knew the dark corners, the abusers who hid behind uniforms, and the forces that sought to manipulate justice. But more importantly, he understood that there was one person no one could ignore. And today, he had not expected to meet that person here, under these circumstances. The moment he walked down the hallway and saw Mark Rollins, the cop with multiple abuse charges, loudly threatening a woman, his heart skipped a beat. His eyes widened, and his face paled as he realized who she was. Attorney General Olivia Carter. The name rang an alarm bell in his head. Olivia Carter is no ordinary prosecutor. She is the head of the state's justice system, holding the ultimate power to prosecute criminals and investigate wrongdoing. Her name is synonymous with a series of corruption and abuse cases that have rocked the police, politics, and business worlds. She is the nightmare of those who think they are above the law. Her face was cold, but dignified. Her sharp eyes swept over Mark as if she knew everything about him. And in fact, she did. Richard felt sweat start to form on his forehead. This was no small incident. This was a disaster. Mark, unaware of the situation, remained standing there, uncomfortable at the presence of his superior. He turned to the police chief, frowning in confusion. "Boss, I'm dealing with a troublemaker," he said, his voice still arrogant. "Shut up, Mark," the sheriff growled, his eyes filled with anger and panic. Mark was startled. He had never seen his boss react like that before. A feeling of unease began to creep into his heart, but he still didn't understand why. Olivia then spoke softly, her voice low but full of power. "It seems this police officer doesn't know who I am." Mark felt a chill down his spine. Who is she? Why did the sheriff react like that? A feeling of doubt ran down his spine. He took another good look at the woman before him, and then he realized. Olivia Carter. Her name was all over the news about justice, about the prosecution of corrupt officials, about the abusers being brought to light. She was the one who caused a series of high-ranking officers to be fired or imprisoned for their wrongdoings. She is the one leading the investigation into policemen like him. Mark felt his legs give way. He had just insulted, threatened, and even abused his power by the very person who could ruin his entire career. His face was pale and cold sweat was pouring out. The surrounding crowd began to notice the tension in the air. A few court staff quietly backed away, sensing that the situation was not normal. Mark stuttered, trying to find a way to turn the situation around. I don't know. I didn't mean to." His voice trembled. But Olivia's eyes didn't change. She looked at him as if he were just a small insect struggling in despair. "Not intentionally," she repeated, her voice carrying a slight irony. "Interesting. So do you think any of your victims were intentionally abused by you?" Mark felt his chest tighten. He had been found out. Olivia took a step toward him, her voice soft but sharp as a knife. "We'll meet again soon, but next time, I'll be the one asking the questions." Those words were like a sentence that had been pronounced. Mark could do nothing but stand there, watching her back as she left, leaving a haunting fear in his mind. The silence in the courtroom lasted a few seconds after Olivia Carter left. But for Mark Rollins, the moment stretched like an endless nightmare. He stood there, his feet glued to the cold marble floor. The sense of power and control he had always felt was gone, replaced by a fear he had never felt before. He knew he had just made a serious mistake. But it was only when he returned to the police station that he realized the real nightmare had only just begun. The next morning, at the Attorney General's office, Olivia Carter and her team officially launched an investigation into Mark Rollins. The conference room was large, with a glass wall overlooking the city, but no one in the room noticed its beauty. The air was tense as Olivia stood at the head of the table, her gaze scanning her colleagues sternly. Before her were thick files containing accusations of Mark Rollins' abuse of power. "Tell me, what do we have?" Olivia asked, her voice calm but authoritative. One of the investigators, James Holloway, opened his laptop and began his presentation. "We have received numerous complaints about Mark Rollins over the past few years, but most of them have been dismissed or not seriously investigated. He has close ties to several high-ranking officials in the police department, which has allowed him to get away with it." Another added, "There are reports of him using excessive force on suspects, in some cases even resulting in serious injuries. But strangely, these cases are always hushed up." Olivia crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes cold. "All those victims? I want a complete list. We will meet them one by one." She turned to Detective Holloway. "Is there any indication that he took a bribe?" Holloway nodded, tapped the keyboard, and the large screen in the conference room displayed a series of financial documents. "We found suspicious transactions in his accounts. Large sums of money were sent from front companies linked to criminal gangs in the city. Based on what we gathered, it appears that he was receiving bribes to protect illegal activities, including drug trafficking and prostitution." The room fell silent. Everyone knew this was more than just an abuse of power. This was serious corruption, one that could land Mark Rollins in prison for decades if convicted. Olivia tapped her fingers on the table, her eyes flashing with a sharp glint. "Prepare the summons. I want him here immediately." Mark was sitting in his office at the police station when a colleague walked in and handed him an envelope with the Attorney General's office seal. He opened it and read, "Summons." His heart pounded. His hands clenched the paper, trying to calm down but couldn't stop the panic rising inside him. What the hell is going on? He always thought he was invulnerable. He had connections with powerful people. He always knew how to hide his actions. But now, he was summoned for questioning by Attorney General Olivia Carter? He swallowed, cold sweat running down his back. No way. He had been dreading this since his run-in with Olivia Carter in court, but he hadn't thought it would come so soon. But he had no other choice. The Attorney General's office interrogation room was simple but dignified. A metal table was placed in the middle of the room, with two chairs facing each other. On the wall was only a clock that was ticking slowly, making the atmosphere even more stifling. Mark sat there, his hands clasped together to hide his anxiety. The door opened. Olivia walked in. She didn't say anything right away. She just quietly pulled up a chair and sat down across from him, placed a thick file on the table, and slowly turned to the first page. The atmosphere became so tense that Mark found it difficult to breathe. Finally, Olivia looked up, her eyes as cold as knives. "So, Mark Rollins," she said, her voice soft but authoritative. "Let's talk about what you did." Mark felt his blood run cold. He sat motionless on the cold metal chair in the interrogation room, staring at the thick file Olivia had just placed in front of him. He knows what's in it. The accusations, the evidence, the crimes he tried to hide for years. He swallowed, trying to keep his face calm, but his hands clenched on the table betrayed him. Olivia watched it all with a calm that was terrifying. She took her time. She knew he was panicking. She opened the file, her voice slow but sharp like a knife cutting into flesh. Mark Rollins, a police officer with the Westwood Police Department. Over the past 5 years, he has been accused of abuse of power, excessive use of force, and accepting bribes to cover up crimes. Below is a list of the victims we have identified. She turned to the next page and pushed the document toward him. Mark looked down. He felt his heart being squeezed. There were a series of names listed there, accompanied by detailed statements. Familiar faces came to mind, people he had beaten, threatened, ruined for daring to oppose him. All these people are waiting for justice, Olivia continued, her voice cold. And what do you think, Mark? What would you say in your defense? Mark took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice calm. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, looking straight at Olivia. I'm just doing my job. These guys are criminals. They'll say anything to fight the police. Olivia smiled, but there was no warmth in her smile. Really? She asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. So can you explain why your bank account has dozens of unexplained payments from front companies linked to criminal gangs? Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Olivia didn't give him the chance. She pulled out another set of documents and placed them on the table. Here is a list of transactions. This is proof that you have been receiving money to protect criminal organizations. Do you still want to say you are innocent? Mark felt cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He knew he was cornered, but he couldn't let himself fall so easily. This is a misunderstanding, he said, his voice losing some of its certainty. Someone may have used my name to make these transactions. Olivia tilted her head to look at him, her eyes as if looking at a wild animal struggling desperately. Oh, that's interesting. She pulled out another file. Because we've got statements from some of your co-workers. Mark froze. The names being read left Mark speechless. Tommy Greaves, Peter Dawson, Michael Langley. These were all policemen he had worked with and trusted completely. They were the ones who had participated in bribery and criminal cover-up deals with him, the ones he thought would never betray him. But they did. Olivia turned a page in the file, beginning to read a passage of the testimony. Police Officer Peter Dawson has admitted that he and you, Mark Rollins, accepted bribes from the Montoya gang to ensure that no investigation into their drug trafficking operations would be launched. Mark clenched his fists. His teeth clenched so hard he almost cried out. And Michael Langley, Olivia continued, testified that he once witnessed you beating a suspect in an interrogation room to the point where the victim suffered broken ribs. And what's worse, Langley said it wasn't the first time you'd done it. Mark felt his body tremble. He lost all protection. All those who once stood on the same side as him are now betraying him to save themselves. News of the investigation into Mark Rollins quickly spread through the media. Major news agencies reported the incident with shocking headlines. The police officer who was once praised as a man of justice turned out to be nothing more than a corrupt man. Mark Rollins, from defender of the law to unchecked abuser of power. Attorney General Olivia Carter's investigation uncovers biggest police scandal in a decade, public outrage. On social media forums, a series of people expressed anger at Mark's actions. His victims began to speak out, recounting what they had experienced at the hands of an abusive police officer. Indignation was growing. The public demands that justice be done. That afternoon, Mark was summoned to the Westwood Police Department. He entered the building, no longer arrogant and confident as before. His colleagues, who had once feared him, now looked at him with contempt or alienation. In Sheriff Richard Coleman's office, Mark stood there, pale as he heard the words that sealed his fate. Mark Rollins, you are suspended indefinitely, pending trial. Mark felt like his whole world was falling apart before his eyes. Very soon, Mark's trial day arrived. The Westwood District Courthouse was packed. Today was an important day. The trial of Mark Rollins, the man who had haunted countless innocent people. The atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy. tense to the point of being almost suffocating. The first row of seats was reserved for Mark's victims, those who had been abused, assaulted, and threatened by him. Many of them carried looks of anger mixed with hope, waiting for a fair sentence. Across the courtroom, Mark Rollins sat in the dock, his face pale, his hands clasped together, palms sweaty. He had stood in courtrooms like this before, but never as the one on trial. He used to mock those accused of crimes, referring to them as the scum of society. Now he is the one being judged. Judge Michael Harrison banged his gavel on the table, declaring the trial officially begun. The prosecutor stepped forward and began to present the case. Mark's charges were read out one by one, and each piece of evidence presented. Accepting bribes from criminal organizations, assaulting innocent people, abusing power to threaten and force confessions, covering up crimes in exchange for personal gain. With each count read, Mark felt his body grow heavier. Prosecutors presented not only financial evidence, but also surveillance video, secret audio recordings, and testimony from former colleagues. Little by little, his brutal acts were exposed before the court. Mark tried to keep his face calm, but he couldn't stop his hands from shaking. He thought he would never be caught. He once thought his high-level connections would protect him forever. But now, no one can save him. The fateful moment finally came. All eyes turned to Judge Harrison as he raised his wooden gavel, his deep voice echoing throughout the courtroom. After considering all the evidence and testimony, the court finds the defendant Mark Rollins guilty of abuse of power, bribery, assault, and intimidation of a witness. The sentence for the defendant is 8 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The trial is over. Pop! The hammer hit the table with a resounding bang. Mark felt like someone had just punched him in the stomach. 8 years in prison. He couldn't believe it. He wanted to scream, wanted to protest, but his throat was dry, completely unable to utter a word. He looked around the courtroom, searching for a familiar gaze, someone who would stand up for him. But no one stood by him. 2 police officers approached, put their hands on his shoulders, and prepared to lead him away. Mark was still sitting in his chair, his eyes filled with utter bewilderment. Then his eyes met Olivia Carter, who was standing near the door, silently observing him from head to toe. He opened his mouth, trying to say something, but no words came out. He wanted to beg. He wanted to say that this was just a mistake, that he deserved leniency. But he knew it was useless. Olivia just looked at him for a long moment, her eyes not containing any pity. She stepped closer, her voice cold like a second sentence for him. No one is above the law. Just one sentence, but it was like a knife cutting deep into Mark's heart. He knew he had lost. Olivia turned and walked out of the courtroom. She didn't need to look back. Justice has been served, and abusers like Mark Rollins will pay the price. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.